After our beating from Brazil and subsequent results elsewhere at the World Cup, Scotland's chances of making the next round are all but gone. How do we end up here? And what lessons can we learn? Hello, I'm Jonathan Sutherland. This is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis on Friday the 26th of June. Scotland's World Cup dream looks all but over.
Here's Guimaraes through at the edge of the penalty area. Opportunity here, he lays it to his right. Cunha scores! Brazil have a third.
It was a night of pain against Brazil, and our percentage chances of reaching the last 32 are now minuscule. What do we take from this tournament experience?
We made it difficult for ourselves. That's it. We gave them the goals, we gave them the game they wanted. Disappointing.
Does the responsibility lie with the manager or the players? And are there deeper issues for the national side? And if so, how do we fix them?
And that is a frustration. And look, you can speak about structure and you can speak about patterns of play and moments and how much attention to detail you've got. See if players don't actually perform at the level to make that work.
After the deep despair, time now for a deep dive right here on the Scottish Football Podcast.
The Scottish Football Podcast.
Before we introduce our guests today, I just want to outline the situation as it stands for Scotland so we all have a clear picture in terms of our now minuscule chances of reaching the next round as one of the best third-placed sides. First of all, South Africa beating South Korea 1-0 the other night didn't help. And then overnight, Ecuador produced an unexpected 2-1 victory over Germany. Again, that didn't help. Sweden were then held by Japan to a 1-1 draw, also qualifying from third place with 4 points. Scotland were down to a 6.89% chance of qualification after that, but are now down to 5.49% after Paraguay played out a stalemate with Australia, which suited both sides. Now, there are 8 groups left to play. Scotland need 4 third-place teams to have a worse record than them. It means they need a minimum of 4 of the following scenarios to play out. I hope you're taking notes. We need Senegal and Iraq to draw, or Iraq to beat Senegal by no more than 2 goals. That's in Group I. In Group H, we need Uruguay to lose to Spain. In Group G, Iran to lose to Egypt. On Saturday, we need Croatia in Group L to lose to Ghana by at least 3 goals. In Group K, DR Congo versus Uzbekistan to be a draw, or Uzbekistan to win by no more than 3 goals. And in Group J, we need Austria and Algeria. We're on 3 points. A draw would send both of them through. So Scotland need Algeria to lose by 2 or more goals, or Austria to be beaten by at least 4 goals. I hope you are following all of that. In summary, it looks very grim for Scotland, and the chances of us going through, as I say, well, the percentages are very, very low indeed. Time now to introduce our guests. The Herald's football writer at large, Stephen McGowan, and the former Rangers, Hearts and Motherwell midfielder, Andy Halliday. Stephen, I'll come to you first. Last time we had you on, it was a very sombre day because you'd passed up the opportunity of a free bar with all your media colleagues to join us, and we were very grateful of that. Is it even sombrer this morning?
I think if ever we needed a drink, it was tonight. I mean, if I was one of the journalists, including a few of your BBC colleagues, that flew back from Miami to Charlotte, and it feels a bit like going back to wait for the guillotine to fall, really, because for the reasons you just outlined in terms of the permutations, it feels like Scotland are done for. I don't think anybody can have any complaint about that. I think they will deserve to go out to the tournament. I think if they did find a way to scrape into the last 32, it would make a nonsense of this format and the expanded 48 teams. So no real complaints there. And I've got a few complaints about the fact that in the scenarios you've outlined, you can have situations where Austria and Algeria or Australia and Paraguay, it suits them perfectly fine to play for a draw and just do that, or the fact that some teams know what they've got to do. But in terms of Scotland, no complaints. I think we're just sitting here in Charlotte now waiting the inevitable, and then it will be time to book flights and get back home.
Yeah, back in 1982, there was that notorious game where Germany and Austria played out a convenient result, and I think it was Algeria got the brunt of that. Here, it kind of feels like the Machiavellian machinations are on a slightly different scale, given the size of the World Cup these days. And Andy Halliday, we're on sort of doom watch, it feels like, for Scotland, and it got a whole lot doomier overnight. Is your World Cup bubble burst?
It is. I think my whole enthusiasm towards this World Cup, Jonathan's dwindled by the day. And when I woke up this morning and I seen the results from last night, like he says, for me that was all but over. You know, it almost felt a sense of inevitability when Bosnia managed to beat Qatar, and then that was followed up by obviously South Africa beating South Korea during the night, and you just felt that. No, we were all doing the mental gymnastics to find out the possibilities of Scotland going through. But once Matheus Cunha scored that third goal for Brazil, there was always that fear that ultimately it was not going to be enough for us to progress into the last 32. And then seeing a nation in Ecuador have real belief that it can go and cause an upset against Germany and follow that up with not only a fantastic result but a fantastic performance, I think all kind of just drummed home that what's going to be inevitably a really disappointing World Cup for us.
Yeah, and I feel like now we need to discuss what happens next and where we are and the deeper context of how we get better. That felt like it was the mantra in the post-match reaction from Steve Clarke and others. How do we get better? We need to be better. We'll get to that in a minute, but I feel like we still need to maybe get a little bit more reflection on that match against Brazil. Stephen, it's the first time we've had you on since then. You've had a little time to think back about it now. Obviously horrendous individual errors, but yeah, what's your take on it with a little bit of time since the actual event?
Well, Brazil don't need any help from anybody to win football games. I think when you do that, as Scott McKenna did in the first 7 minutes, after a reasonably composed start to the game, then you're giving yourself an absolute mountain to climb. We saw the impact that had against Morocco. And in fact, if you look at the second goal last night, that was another defensive failure as well. So of the goals they have lost, I think, is it 4 goals they've lost, and 3 of them have been from really bad mistakes. You're not giving yourself much of a chance if that happens. I mean, I feel there's a bigger picture. I feel there's a bigger story. I mean, I know you were going to move on to it shortly, but I think it's one Steve Clarke's looking at as well, which is that a team is only as strong as its weakest parts, really. And the weak links in the Scotland team, for all that we have good teams, good players playing at a high level, I think our central defence, I think their attack, I think their goalkeeper. And we have to look at why we're not producing those kind of players. And we need to start looking at this situation with the lack of minutes for players aged under 21 in the Scottish Premiership, about the fact that so many go down south for the big money, and understand that. And there's bigger issues, I think, than just I think looking at the coach's tactics. But ultimately, I think a lot of people are really unhappy with Steve Clarke. I totally understand that, but it's an old cliche, but how does he legislate for errors like Scott McKenna or Grant Hanley or even Andy Robertson or Nathan Patterson and so on? It's really perplexing because they were so avoidable.
So much to talk about, obviously, and inevitably, Andy, do end up talking about the manager. And yes, he's taken us to 3 of the last 4 major tournaments, but it does feel like deja vu from the last Euros in terms of us being a bit of a damp squib in the end. He has just signed a new contract. How much confidence do you have that he is, the right man to help these players make another great leap forward?
Well, I think the bigger worry is it's probably not going to be these group of players. I think that it's then looking at the next batch of young Scottish players that are coming through, and I would question, who are they at the moment? When you look at, it could possibly be Andy Robertson's last tournament, and John McGinn potentially as well, and obviously Scott McTominay's getting older, and these are players that have been the Scotland talisman for a number of years now, and my question is, if it's Steve Clarke that's obviously going to be leading the next batch to come through, there's no real names that are jumping out to me at the minute that's going to be the guys to come in and replace these players. So I think Steve Clarke's obviously been in tenure now for 7 years, deserves enormous credit for getting us to 3 major tournaments. But I just feel as if the question's got to be asked, has he took us as far as he can? Because he said in his press conference before this tournament that he learnt lessons himself in the Euros. I'd be interested to see what the lessons are, because I don't think there's been major improvement coming into this tournament. He said that he was going to enjoy it a lot more, the experience of being at the World Cup for the first time. Doesn't look all that happy. I know he's not that type to be laughing and joking and jovial, but no, there is a slight sense of worry for me moving forward, because at this moment in time, I just don't think that there's a major output improvement when we've got to major tournaments. And like I says, in terms of young players coming through, we don't even have enough Scottish young players playing in their domestic league. So how do we expect them to break into our national team?
I think there's two sides to the contract thing when you look at it. I think most of us probably look at that 4-year contract now and say, why did they do that before the World Cup? I mean, we could have foreseen this scenario playing out because we've seen it happening before. And I think probably if you ask most of the country today, would you happily shake hands with Steve Clarke and say, let's try something new? I think most people would. I think there's a lot of antipathy. There's a lot of antagonism towards them out there now. I think people get bored of football managers these days. They're a bit like cars. You go 3 or 4 years, you've had enough. You want a new one. But ultimately, if they hadn't given him a new contract, there's a flip side to this. And if they performed like this, which is perfectly feasible, people would have said, well, it's because of the uncertainty hanging over his contract. So I think probably the contract situation should have been handled a long time ago. I think it dragged on too long. It became a bigger issue than it should have. They were forced almost with their back against the wall to give him a new deal. And now I think people are entitled to be asking questions and saying, was that the best thing to do in light of the World Cup performances? You can understand why they would question that.
And Stephen, you're back in Charlotte, where the Scotland team have based themselves as they wait to find out what happens next. What is the sense in Charlotte? I mean, how much access will you be getting in terms of the media pack to the Scotland squad between now and whenever it is they go home?
Very little, I would think. I mean, this is. I think this is the land of Billy Graham, the American evangelist. He's the favourite son of Charlotte, and it's quite appropriate because really all you can do now is pray, because it really is our only hope that somehow or other something jumps out the ether and offers Scotland a chance. But it doesn't look very likely. It doesn't look very deserved. And I think when that happens, what we saw after the last tournament was that they went to ground. We didn't speak to the manager for I think it was something like 15 weeks, I think somebody said. He didn't really speak, do much media. It remains to be seen whether that will be the case this time, whether it will open up. It would make sense to grab the narrative. I think he is something that probably needs to be said, because Craig Mulholland's coming as the kind of head of football at the SFA. And they need to start coming up with a strategy to change this, because Scotland are the epitome of the old phrase, it's better to travel than it is to arrive. Because we're quite good at getting to tournaments, but once we get there, we have a bad habit of stinking the place out. So we need to come up with a strategy to produce better players. It goes back to Andy's point, which I think is spot on, that there are no obvious candidates coming through to fill these 30-something players in the squad. And the worry now is that even though this has been a really underwhelming tournament, in 4 or 5, 10, 15 years, people will be looking through this with sepia-tinged lenses, because it may be some time again before we go back to another World Cup once this group of players are gone.
Andy, Stephen talks about the players that we have at our disposal, and we do have some really top players, maybe not enough, and there are problem positions. We've spoken about them so many times. Central defence, in the striker position. Is it time that we started maybe thinking outside the box slightly? And I can't help thinking back to the Euros at 2016. Wales got themselves to the semi-finals. They converted Gareth Bale, who was essentially a left back, who kind of moved to become a left winger. They turned him into a striker. Now, I'm not saying Scott McTominay's in the same class as Gareth Bale, but he is our closest thing. He is a superstar in Italy, and he does get goals there. when it was all done against Brazil, we were 3-0 down. When the chances came, they came to him. Is there a case to say that we should be trying to convert him, if you like, into a striker? Because he does get on the end of things. He does know where the back of the net is. He was a bit unfortunate that his efforts against Brazil went straight to the keeper. Could that be a way forward, or is that just too much of a stretch?
I think for me personally, I think it is a little bit of a stretch, but I can completely understand, Jonathan, why we'll be looking for solutions however may we can. But I think a lot of Scott McTominay's strength for me is arriving into the box. So late runs from deep, he scored the amount of goals he scored in qualifying tournaments for Scotland from that deeper position and that kind of number 10 role playing off a striker. But that being said, I think Scott McTominay, in terms of individuals within the squad, I think he was probably as disappointing as any. And that's probably due to the high bar that he's set over the last 2-3 years. He's been a talisman. He's came up with massive goals. I think his overall contribution to the game, though, even if he's not scored a goal in a game, I think a really, really high output. But I think along with many, I think you're only really handpicking one or two throughout the squad that individually you think that they've probably got pass marks and performed well. But I think it's deeper than that, Jonathan. I really do think a lot of it's down to the structure of the side, how they're coached on the ball. And you touched on it earlier. I think a big strength and a real positive for Steve Clarke is he's always had us defensively sound. I think we're always compact, we're always aggressive. We use this word resilience and character all the time. But I think we've even got away from that in this World Cup. Now, I don't know if a big part of that is down to the heat and the humidity, which I can completely understand. I've played in similar climates and it's extremely difficult to have the same output. But I think we've lost a little bit of that real aggressiveness. I've watched Brazil, Morocco and Haiti, for me, look a lot more aggressive than we've been off the ball when the balls went into certain areas. But then on the ball, for me, I completely agree with you guys that Scott McKenna has made a huge error in the first goal. But for me, there's about 4 or 5 errors before Scott McKenna even receives the ball. I mean, you're looking at your two centre midfielders in front of your central defender being 40 yards away, but the team looks as if they're set up to play out for the goal kick. And it then leads to Scott McKenna not having enough options. And then he dilly-dallies, which is where obviously the huge error on his part comes. If the option's not there to play forward, then you clear your lines. But for me, I think Scotland look extremely off the cuff when they're on the ball. I don't think they look as well coached as other sides. But obviously, coupled with that, with your big players and your star players and individually not performing at the levels, and unfortunately, you're only going to go one way, and that's back to Scotland.
Well, I was going to say that, Andy. I mean, Steve Clarke says we have to be better. How do we become better? Do you feel, and is it just better coaching, or players making better decisions, or bringing in better players? But presumably you've got the best players there.
Can I come in this one, Jonathan? I mean,
yes,
he's kind of hinted at it with us, as I said earlier. I think there's an acceptance. We're not producing good young. We are producing good young players. We're not giving them first team opportunities. And I mean, if you're talking about how do we change it, I think one of the things we really need to look at is how easy it is to get a work permit for overseas players in Scottish football. I'm not saying we need to go back to a free foreigner rule, or I don't know if it did be as draconian as that, but we need to get players under 21 playing first team football and having a pathway. That's just not happening at the minute. And we're storing up big, big problems for ourselves in future if we continue like this. I think Steve Clarke's kind of alluded to that last night. I think Craig Mulholland's coming in to address it. And until we get real about this issue, I just don't see how anything changes.
I think you go with that, Andy. I mean, I think the quota of players that maybe Premiership clubs need to play in terms of young players.
Absolutely. I mean, I've said this many times in the past. When I was a young player coming through, there was only 5 subs initially, and then it went to 7 subs, and within that 7 subs, there had to be 2 homegrown under 21 players on the bench. Now we're not 7 subs, we're 9 subs, so we've actually got a bigger pool of squad. Yet there's no rule in place that it's mandatory. There has to be X amount of Scottish players within the squad. I've said for a long time, I think the league pyramid needs a restructure. I'm a big advocate of B teams being back in the league. We like to copy the top nations around Europe for a lot of things, but for some reason we don't copy how they produce players. And a big part of that is B teams in the league, and that's coming through all the way up to Championship level, promotion and relegation. We had Celtic and Rangers in the Lowland League for, I think it was 3 seasons. Celtic 3 seasons, Rangers 2 seasons, Hearts be 2 seasons, but they couldn't get promoted. And for me, you want to try and expose your younger players to first team football as quickly as possible. I do think that the cooperation agreement, I think, has been a real positive. I think you've seen that last year with the amount of young players that went out and have, off the back, it had good seasons, get 30, 35 games. But for me, that's the first hurdle. That's the first step. For me, I think we've still got so much more to give and so much more to change.
Andy, you're involved. You've got your own academy and bringing through young players at grassroots level as well. At the World Cup, I'm just always struck by how countries like Morocco and obviously Brazil, they bring through all these players that have that bit of football artistry. It looks like they've been playing with the ball at their feet, doing tricks for ever since they could walk, basically. And I just feel like in this country we don't seem to have that same kind of a culture of football coming through. And I just wonder, in terms of grassroots, how you see it in terms of, are we teaching the kids the right things coming through, do you feel, or is it too much to do with organisation and work rate, or can we change something in terms of that to bring more players through with the skills required?
Well, I think in certainly academy football, from what I've seen, I think they're being taught the right things and being taught to play the right way. But for me, Jonathan, I think we're still stuck in this mindset in Scotland that the result is the only thing that matters, yet we don't win anything. We don't win anything at club football, we don't win anything at international level, when it's development is the only thing that matters. So it's developing younger players, it's developing teams, even when you get to first team level to improve them, and then that's how you win. And for me, I even look at our domestic football. I don't see enough, like you say, players being utilised in squads and in teams to develop them. Younger Scottish players within that as well. And I look at the two real success stories. Three if you include Derek McInnes for his Hearts, but the other two, and Jens Bertolarsky at Motherwell and John McGlynn's Falkirk, they succeeded, they improved, they developed players. Motherwell are going to come off the back of this season earning more money than probably ever earned with Elijah Just and Tawanda Maswanisi and Elliot Watt. Falkirk have come off the back of a successful top six season, and they've already sold Calvin Miller, they've sold Barney Stewart for a club record fee, they've sold Dylan Tate for money. But that's not just because results, that's because they're developing teams and developing players. Whereas you ask other managers up and down the country, 3 points is all that matters. All that matters is that they win. Well, for me, I completely disagree. That's your short term, but what's your long term success? And I think we've caught in a wee bit of that up and down the country. That's not me just labelling that Steve Clarke, far from it. I think that's a stigma that I've seen in Scotland for far too long, that the only thing that matters is 3 points. But if you're talking about long-term success of the nation, it's much more than that.
Stephen, are you hopeful of change in Scottish football as a whole? I mean, the SFA performance schools are being phased out. There's the SPFL academies with some of the clubs, but as we've already discussed, there's an issue in terms of young players making the breakthrough in terms of the Premiership. And I think Ian Maxwell, the SFA chief executive, spoke recently about how clubs need to be more strategic in terms of bringing young players through, whatever that means exactly. Are you hopeful?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because Craig Mulholland's come in and has replaced Andy Gould, who left for a senior job, I think it was with FIFA, and Chris Docherty, who the two of them were the co-authors of the report that came up with the cooperation agreements, and they followed that up with one on youth development. And it was interesting. It was really interesting to read because they were advocating taking a lot of the lessons from the culture of Japan, and instead of having the performance skills, I mean, I think that the school of thought was that if you have not mastered the basics of football by the age of 12, between the ages of 12 and 16, you're probably not going to do it. So they wanted to emulate the teachers of a guy called Tom Bayer, who's a coach in Japan, who's been an American working there for a long time. And his lesson is you've got to learn to love a football at a very young age. You look at so many of the great players like Messi, Haaland, Ronaldo, Modric and so on. They've all got stories from their past that they grew up with a football as their favourite toy, and it became, they took it to bed at night. And basically they came up with this report that said the Scottish football needs to try and get that culture going. Now, how you do that, I don't know. I mean, if people are living in a flat in Wester Hailes or Easter House, how many balls can I have in the house? How plausible is it to kick them around? But I think we need some out of the box thinking. The problem is that Andy Gould and Chris Doherty are both left the SFA now. Craig Mulholland's come in. Does he feel the same way as them? Do they pursue that strategy? Or do we do what we so often do and go off in a completely different way all over again? This remains to be seen.
Remember, there's a ton of World Cup content and podcasts across the BBC, including the Scottish Football Podcast. Just search World Cup on the BBC Sounds app. I feel like we need to lighten the mood and give ourselves a break here because it's been a tough couple of days. And just as well, we've got a new and improved quickfire set of questions, which I know, guys, you'll be absolutely delighted to hear. And let's just get going, shall we? Will Scotland go through? These haven't been updated properly, but let's just go with it anyway. Stephen?
No.
I think that's
Andy.
the easiest question we'll get all week, Jonathan. No.
Oh, dear. What's been your moment of the World Cup so far, Stephen?
I've really enjoyed watching the USA, actually.
Okay, that's left field.
I watched a game earlier tonight. Okay, they lost to Turkey, but just such energy, tempo, speed. I think every good World Cup needs a good host, and a host that's actually going well and successful. They made 9 changes to their starting 11 tonight, but I really like what's happening there under Maurizio Pochettino, and I'm going to be watching them with interest.
Fair enough. Andy, what's been your moment of the World Cup so far?
39-year-old Lionel Messi, still doing it.
It is an inspirational, wonderful story. It's amazing to watch, in fact. Who's winning the World Cup, Stephen?
Argentina.
Andy?
France, I'll stick with France.
You're sticking with France. Okay. This is the last question. Stephen, what's been your Scotland high and Scotland low of the World Cup?
John McGinn's goal was deflected or not. I mean, it was a rare moment of levity. I told him it was been a bit short on him. Scotland low, yeah, it was a Scott McKenna the other night. I mean, we went to that ground with such high hopes and such high kind of ambitions and aspirations. You get through the 72nd mark, you think we're doing okay here, and then it all falls apart. I mean, that was a real gut punch, that, because you knew from then on we're never getting back in the game.
Andy, what's been your Scotland high and Scotland low of the World Cup?
My high's probably been the Tartan Army representing Scotland. They knew they would, or the social media videos you're seeing. I think they've completely took America, Mexico and Canada by storm off the pitch. Maybe not quite as much on the pitch, but the social media videos in Flower of Scotland has been incredible. And in terms of my lows, the realisation of we're not very entertaining over the course of 3 games.
It's quite an amazing feeling. I don't know. I mean, I sometimes feel, am I being a little bit over dramatic just in terms of how I feel? I feel very, very down about it, I have to be honest. I guess because you look forward to these moments so much. We've looked forward to the World Cup so much, Stephen, as a nation. It meant so much for us to get there, the high of Denmark, and now here we are. I mean, I guess we're all just sharing that feeling right now.
I mean, for before the Brazil game, journalists would go out for dinner and we'd be sitting there planning a route to Mexico City. You know, you're sitting there, you're thinking, right, how are we going to get there? How's it going to work with flights and logistics? Wouldn't it be fantastic to go to the Azteca? And then you see that performance and you think, my God, we're kidding ourselves. And I think that is really sobering. I think when you get to that point, and I agree with Andy, you look at countries like South Africa, like Ecuador tonight as well, who've had moments. They've had moments to absolutely treasure. And okay, we had a great night at Hampden in November, but wouldn't it be nice just at the finals with Scotland if it was just a moment that everybody could really remember and cling to and treasure? Because it just feels like it's never going to happen sometimes.
I know those countries like Qatar and DR Congo and even South Africa. Nobody's telling me, Andy, that they've got better players than we do, and yet they've had moments of inspiration and success that they'll be able to look back on, and we just haven't had that. I mean, how are you coping with what feels like the aftermath already?
Yeah, I mean, I don't say this lightly. I said at the top of the show, but there is just an overwhelming sense of disappointment, and it's gradually got worse after the Haiti game, believe it or not, all the way through to now. I think even the Haiti game, I came away for the podcast I done with that time, Jonathan. I was like, am I being a bit too harsh? First World Cup win in 36 years, but the reason being, I thought the level of performance was worrying to take into the next two games against really strong opposition, and then the margin of victory. There was obviously that fear that ultimately it's not going to be enough. And I think if you fast forward now 10 days or whatever it is, 2 weeks, I think it's proven to be true. And like I'm watching, for me, lesser nations with less quality players than we do. I mean, you look at Cape Verde and what they managed to do against Spain and Uruguay. Obviously, that's almost an anomaly at how exceptional they performed in the 2 games to get their results. But I think what Stephen says really resounded, because I said at the top, I said before the World Cup started, who's going to produce that Archie Gemmill moment for all the younger generation now to be talked about in 40, 50 years? And unfortunately, it's another major tournament where we've not scored that goal that's going to capture a younger player. And again, it's just an overwhelming sense of disappointment for a number of reasons.
Guys, thank you very much. Stephen, thank you very much. If this is to be our final hurrah for all your sacrifices for us, I hereby induct you into the Scottish Football Podcast Hall of Fame.
Can I go to my bed now? Is that okay?
That is allowed. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Andy, I will drop you a text when you are glued to Austria versus Algeria at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, just to let you know that you're not alone, okay?
Thank you.
Guys, thank you very much indeed. Never miss out on new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast. Subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone. Scottish Football, the gift that keeps on giving. Thanks for listening.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.